Welcome to Amazing Indiana Music Stories.
I want to ask about your family. You grew up in a musical family.
I
You had
did.
some prominent folks in your family who are involved in music, including your grandmother, Flossie Franklin, who co-wrote songs that have become blues standards with Leroy Carr, songs like Blues Before Sunrise. First of all, tell us about your grandma and the musical environment you grew up in at home.
My grandmother was a multifaceted person. She loved music. She was also an outdoor person. She loved to fish and trap and hunt. So she had a lot of different things that she liked to do, but music was just something that we didn't even know that other people's homes weren't like ours. It was constant. There was always music play. It was either on the radio, phonographs, or somebody was in the living room playing on the baby grand piano. And it was just a constant ongoing way of life.
Your uncle was known as Guitar Pete Franklin, a very prominent blues musician. He played guitar, piano, sang. He recorded for RCA Victor, a very significant figure in Indiana blues music. Tell me about your uncle.
Well, my Uncle Pete was a very driven person. He loved music and he loved life. And for him, music was just a way that he communicated to people. In other words, I think it was much easier for him to play for people than it was to talk to people. So it was his way of having a conversation, and I didn't really realize that when I was a child. But now that I'm older now, I realize that that was his primary way of communication, was through the guitar or the piano. And he could play both extremely well. And I didn't really realize how well he could play them either until I started playing. Then I started thinking, wow, this guy's a lot better than I imagined.
Were you listening to his records when you were a kid? Did you understand that he had this national reputation in blues music?
I did. I really did. Not until I got to be maybe 11 or 12 years old. Then I became aware of his recordings, and I became aware that he had done things other than what I had seen, because he really didn't talk about them a great deal. He just did things, and to him he just moved on to the next event. So he didn't really elaborate very much about it. But later I discovered and found out many of the things that he had done.
You grew up in this rich musical environment. When did you start getting interested in music personally, and when did you start playing music?
I started playing music pretty young. Well, let me put it this way. My interest in music, I can't remember when I wasn't, because we were raised around a total, I call it a music bath. We were just literally bathed in music. So when we opened our eyes, even as a small child, as a toddler, I can remember being at my grandparents' house, and me and my cousin and my brother, we would sneak out of bed and crawl to the edge of the upstairs balcony so we could hear all the music, because there was a grand piano in the living room, so there was always music, live music. And so for me, it was just almost, I can't even remember when I wasn't interested. So trumpet was my first instrument for about 2 years, and then I picked up trombone. I played trombone all the way through grade school into high school, and then I picked up bass violin, and that was my introduction to electric bass in high school under Mr. Newsom. But all the way through grade school, I was in the marching band under Mr. Brown.
Yeah. Brown and Newsom were very respected teachers at Crispus Attucks, which had a very venerated and famous music program. Tell me about the teachers at Crispus Attucks and the quality of the music education they provided young people.
The music education was same. It was almost like some of the other things. I didn't realize how great Mr. Brown and Mr. Newsom really were. And as I got a little older, I began to realize that they were. So Mr. Brown gave me private lessons, There was a church on Paris Street, and I used to go there every Saturday morning for trombone lessons. And he used to hit me on my fingers because I was supposed to memorize the lines and the staffs. You know, every good boy does fine, and I had the lines and the spaces. And I would get my horn out, and he would ask me to play, and he would draw on the line, and I would goof it up, and he would come over there while I had the slide trombone and the little baton, and you Johnson, you're not paying attention, you know. And I'm like, okay. So, but I learned how to read music as a result of him hitting me on the fingers. But he was a great teacher. Mr. Newsom had a totally different personality. He was very quiet, and he would basically just give me music, and he would tell me to take the bass home. We had these, I didn't know it at the time, they were actually made during World War II. They were made out of aluminum, and they were made by Grumman, the Grumman Aircraft Company, and these aluminum body upright basses. So you really couldn't hardly damage it. And he would encourage me to take the bass home over the weekend and practice on the music, and I did. And I fell in love with the bass. I liked playing trombone. I was okay with the trumpet, but the bass was like magic, because I'd always been attracted to the sound of the bass, but when I was a kid, I didn't know what instrument made it. And then when I found out the string bass was the sound I was focusing on, I was like, wow, so I fell in love with the bass. I still am.
Where exactly was your family living when you were a young person?
Well, actually, I grew up on 33rd Street, 1005 West 33rd Street, and my grandparents lived on 29th Street, same 1000 block. And I used to walk from our house on 33rd to my grandparents. So it was just about 4 blocks. So I was constantly back and forth from where we grew up right there in the Crown Hill neighborhood to my grandparents' house.
You started playing music out in clubs professionally at a young age, right? I know Harvey Cook in the Blue Tones was an entry point for you. Harvey Cook was a blues musician who led a band for decades in Indianapolis. Right. Tell me about some of your early experiences playing in bands.
Well, to be honest, the earliest experience came in high school, and that was me and Dwayne Garvin and Greg, oh man, what is Greg's last name? We call him Mousy. He plays trumpet.
Oh, Scott.
Greg Scott.
Yeah.
We had a band. That was the first band I was ever in. It was called the Continentals, and we were a high school band. And that was where I really started playing, and that's how I got the electric bass. My parents went to Sears and bought me a bass amp from Sears, and bought a little pocket-sized bass from a pawn shop on Ohio Street. And that was when I got that was like 1959. So I was like, I was pretty young.
Were you playing out in clubs with the Continentals, or was that more like a
then,
garage
then
band?
we would just, me, Dwayne, and Greg, and we would practice in there was a piano that was in the gym that was on rollers, and we would practice in there for a little while until they would put us out. And then we started practicing at the YMCA that used to be on Fall Creek. There was a room there with the upright piano, so that's where we would practice at, and those were our practice spots. And at my parents' house, because my mom had upright, well, they weren't pianos in everybody's house. We had one at our house, and my mom played vibraphones. There was vibraphones, piano. We had a tape recorder, everything there. So we practiced. Those were our practice places.
How did you get connected with Harvey Cook, and how old were you when you first started playing with him?
15. When I was in high school playing with Ethel, I was 14, and I met Harvey when I was 15. He heard me playing in high school, and I didn't really know who he was. And he told my parents that he liked the way I played, and he wondered would they allow me to play in his band. And my parents said, well, he's only 15 years old. And so Harvey told my parents that, well, he can get a work permit and he can play, but he can't stay in the bar while they're, when we're not playing. And that was how it all began. I was 15 years old.
How
so
did that feel, being in a nightclub, 15 years old,
it
playing
was,
to adults?
It was really, honestly, it was exciting. It was almost mind-blowing because my friends, the guys I was, they were still doing high school stuff, and I was, in a sense, being thrust into a completely adult situation, and I was doing adult things. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke or anything like that, but I was in an adult environment, and I was kind of used to high school girls, but grown women, that's a whole different thing. I was like, woo-wee, so my eyes are bugging out of my head half the time. As a young kid, you can imagine being 15 years old, and when these ladies would get a few drinks in them, they would get up and start shaking and moving and stuff. And it was much more suggestive than anything you could do in high school. So I'll just leave it at that.
How late would you play at that time?
Well, back then, the clubs couldn't stay open till like 3 in the morning like now. Back then, clubs shut down at 1 o'clock.
So you'd be out till 1 o'clock as a 15-year-old playing with Harvey Cook?
Yep. And Harvey would pick me up and he would bring me home. He would put my amp in the trunk. He had a Ford Crown Victoria convertible with a Continental kit, baby blue.
What were some of the clubs you played in? I know he was big at the Place to Play on Indiana Avenue. Where all did you play with Harvey?
I played at Place to Play upstairs. I played at Fred Douglas After Hours. I played at the Surfside 7. It used to be on 24th Street. I played at the old Flame Show Bar. It used to be on New York and Blake. Where else? The Blue Eagle, California and Indiana Avenue. But the first place I played was the Paradise Inn, which was almost across the street from where the old Blue Eagle was. And the Paradise Inn was the first bar, tavern I'd ever played in. Smelled like beer and cigarettes and perfume.
Yeah. People talk so much about Indiana Avenue. The history there is so legendary. What was it actually like to be in there playing in the clubs? What was the atmosphere like? Exciting.
It really was, because the people then, when people came out to a club or something, it was very different than what you see now. People weren't when people came out, they came out with the intention of having a good time. So as soon as they came through the door, they started popping their fingers, dancing, interacting with the musicians, the other people, and dancing. So it was really alive. It was very lively, and people didn't wait. If you were a lady, there would be plenty of guys who want to dance with you, but if they weren't dancing, ladies would get up and dance. And so I see guys get up and dance. If they liked the music, they would get up in front of the bands and dance and do things. So it was really exciting, really. People put on their best clothes. That was another thing. Back then, people did not come in casual clothes. When you could be playing in a blues bar and people would show up in a 3-piece suit, or women be wearing the nicest dress they have, and patent leather high heels and stockings, and in other words, it was special. It was not just, it was different.
Many of the clubs on the Avenue at that time were still doing the vaudeville type of entertainment bill, where they'd have a comedian, they'd have novelty acts like Iron Jaw Memphis, who roller skated, they'd have female impersonators. Were you playing with those sorts of novelty acts, or was it all?
I did.
Yeah.
What
do you remember about that?
They called it a floor show. That was what they called it. So Iron Jaw Memphis, he would pick up. I played behind Iron Jaw at After Hours, and because the reason most of the floor shows took place at bigger clubs, because the smaller clubs didn't really have enough room and they couldn't afford it. So Fred Douglas was a pretty good sized club. So was the Pink Poodle. And the Sunset, for that matter. So a lot of these places where they would have the floor shows, and they would have like Lottie the Body, come out and do some shimmy shakes. Some of them would have snakes. Man, you saw everything. I mean, stuff that you can't imagine. I mean, you pay $1.50, you got your money's worth. And you had enough money, if you had $5, you could buy 3 beers and get in. I mean, so people really came, they had a great time.
Describe Iron Jaw's act, because I don't think people understand the kind of entertainment.
Iron Jaw was amazing. He would pick, and if there were more ladies that were in the room, the more he showed off. He would pick up a table or chair with his teeth and the corner of it, and he would put on roller skates, and he would skate around with that table in his jaw. He would do dances, put his arms out in the air and do the bird. He would do all the dances of that era, the dog, the horse. He would do these dances. He would do, he was amazing.
Yeah.
He was amazing.
You mentioned the burlesque dancers like Lottie the Body. Were you working on bills with the female impersonators at that time?
Not knowingly.
Yeah. You might have been and just didn't know.
I could have. It could have happened. I didn't know it. Most of the female impersonators pretty much stuck to the Pink Poodle, and also there was a club over on College.
Betty K's.
Betty K's.
Yeah.
So both of those venues specialized in what then they called them female impersonators. But I think maybe there probably was a few times playing Fred Douglass after hours that there may have been some female impersonators, but if they did, I didn't necessarily know.
Yeah.
Because we would just play and these various people would come on and they had an MC, and so we would just have to play, and they would tell us what song they wanted the band to play, and we would play that, and then they would either skate out, come out dancing, or whatever they would want to do.
Was that fun for you as a musician, or would you have rather played your own music all night?
No, it was fun. It was really a lot of fun because they would do things, and it was kind of like playing for theater. So when Iron Jaw would do certain things, like the drummer, we had to play accents. He would bop, 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 bop. So all these things he did. If he twirled, he wanted the drummer to do a press roll. So no, it was a lot of fun. Really, it was an education, and because I learned how to play theater music by playing after hours in dives.
Yeah.
And so when I got to play theater music, I had it already down. All I had to do was watch him and figure out, well, okay, watch the conductor, because I've been doing it for 5 or 6, really 10 years before I ever had a chance to play in a theater.
Since you mentioned after hours clubs, I did want to ask you about that, because that was a big part of the nightlife culture at that time. After the bars would shut down, you said at 1 p.m.
1 o'clock.
There would be after hours clubs that operated under the books or off the books. Tell us about these clubs. Frederick Douglass was one on the Avenue. I know there's a famous one called the Chili Bowl.
Lee's Chili Bowl.
Yeah, tell me about the after hours clubs, what went on, and did you play at these clubs?
Okay, well, I'll start with the Sunset. The Sunset really operated when I started playing as after hours. It would start at right after we would move our equipment. So at 1:30 we would be on the stage playing, and pretty much it was they had, if you wanted a drink, you could not get a drink in a bottle. You would tell them what you wanted, and they would put it in a paper cup. So if you wanted a beer, you got it in a paper cup. If you wanted a mixed drink, it came in a paper cup. So everything was kind of done under the table like that. Food, you could buy food. I mean, as long as you wanted chicken wings or fried fish, I mean, you could get all that you wanted, but that was the menu. And let me see. Now at the Fred Douglass was much larger. They had a more, in a sense, I wouldn't say larger, but they had a more sophisticated operation. They had a cigarette girl. You could pull these little tabs. You could gamble. You could pull these little tabs for $1 or 50 cents. So they had gambling, a cigarette girl. You could buy drinks at a table. They call it a setup. And if you tell them you wanted a pint or half pint, and they would have 1 kind of gin and 1 kind of whiskey, and those are the choices. And you could either get a 7-Up or a Coke, and that was the choices, and ice. and they would charge you for each individual item. And waitress would bring it over to your table, and when you finish that half pint, or that they call it a setup, then you call the waitress over and she will bring you another one.
I mentioned these clubs were operating under the table, off the books. Sometimes they would get raided by the police. Did you ever see that happen?
I got caught in one of them.
Wow.
In fact, I got caught in one of the raids at Fred Douglass. In fact, well, my wife can tell you this, it followed me, and I didn't realize that I had, this was on my a record. I was arrested in 1968 at Fred Douglass for visiting a common dive. I was playing there that night with Billy Ball and the Upsetters, and I got bonded out in about 2 hours. But I was playing there. Yeah, I got caught in one of them, and so later, when they were doing a check of my a background check, I had to go get, I said, what? I said, you mean you got from 1968? I just gotten out of the Army. I'd only been out of the Army about 4 weeks, and Billy offered me a job, and I needed the money. So, yeah.
How old were you when you first started playing at the after-hours clubs?
Oh, heck, I started playing the after hours just about a year or so after I started playing with Harvey. So I was like 16.
Wow.
I was like 16 years old.
Yeah. I heard they sometimes would let the musicians off when they raided, but they didn't let you off, the police?
Not that night.
Yeah, yeah.
Not that night. Typically they would, but not that night. And actually I was filling in for a bass player. Billy's regular bass player was Charles White. And Charles wasn't able to play that night, and so I was filling in for Charles. If it hadn't been for that, I wouldn't. I may have been there, but I wouldn't have gotten arrested. But not that night.
Going back to your early experiences in music, you mentioned Ethel earlier. You're talking about Ethel McCain, I believe, who was in the girl group, the Chordells. There was that was the era of the girl groups, like the Ronettes, and Indianapolis had quite a few girl groups. You had your first professional recording experience recording with the Chordells up in Chicago, I believe, for a label called Tiger. Tell me about your work with the Chordells and this early experience you had to make a record in a professional studio.
Well, it was another exciting thing. Me and Ethel were in the school cafeteria in Attucks, and the Chordells were all at a table, and I went over there, a young guy, and I knew they had a singing group, and I went over there, and they knew I played bass or bass guitar, but they had a guy playing piano, Kenny Lewis, and Dwayne Garvin was playing drums. So Dwayne told me to go over there, man, and talk to him. So I did, and I went over there. But when I went over there, man, I was talking. I said, hey, man, you girls need to give me your phone numbers and stuff. They looked at me and said, boy, you better go somewhere. And they said, no, don't tell them that, man. Tell them you want to play with them. I said, oh, yeah. I said, I play bass. I want to play with you guys. And they gave me an audition, and they hired me on the spot. And we went to, I started rehearsing with Ethel, and she told me they had a record deal, and I was like, well, let's go. And we rehearsed for about 3 or 4 weeks. We went up Chicago, Michigan Avenue. There was the Playboy Club was on Michigan, but they also was Playboy, and it was owned by Hugh Hefner, Playboy Recording Studios. And it was right in the same building, and we recorded in there. And man, you said my eyes bugging out of your head. I was like, wow, Playboy Club, the Playgirls. I was like, man, it was exciting. We went there, we recorded Quit While Ahead. I don't even remember the B-side.
I Was Blind, I think. Yeah, I Was Blind. I can hear it in my head, yeah.
It was all done in pretty much 2 takes. There wasn't any real multi-tracking. They had a crude mixer. They had I remember the tape machine, it was a Norelco. It used regular 1/4-inch tape. It wasn't a big, because I had never seen, at that time, I had never seen a big professional 1/2-inch or 2-inch. I had never seen that. So we went in the studio and we recorded it, and my mom drove us up there, and she had a 1958 Cadillac, and it was in the wintertime, and there was ice on the bridges. There was no interstate then. It was good to go all the way up Highway 52. And we drove up in the winter over these icy bridges and recorded it, and we turned around and came right back.
Wow. How old were you when you made that record?
I think 14.
Wow, that's amazing. Your mom really supported your aspirations to be a musician, it sounds like.
She did. She encouraged it, and she didn't. Honestly, they were okay with it because in our family, it was just like my uncle was a musician, my mom was a musician, my aunt was a singer, and my uncle. So it wasn't. They didn't discourage it at all. They gave me some warnings about things like about drugs and alcohol. And they were very, very, very strict about that. And they told me, said, "Don't you ever, ever, ever." And they were very serious about it. I'm glad they gave me that advice, because a lot of young musicians didn't get that kind of advice, and they got in a lot of trouble.
Since we're talking about your family, I do want to mention this person, and I can never remember exactly what the family relationship is, but this is a significant figure in Indianapolis music that you're related to, the guitarist Johnny Shacklet, who was a contemporary at Wes Montgomery's and a musical genius, really.
Oh, he is, man. He was man. He knows every chord and every inversion ever known to mankind. Johnny Shacklet was married to my mom's younger sister, Dorothy. And that was how I got to know Johnny. So he wasn't an uncle he was uncle by marriage. So when I was a sophomore in high school, my mom decided that she wanted me and my brother to go to, she didn't want to, because there were things that the atmosphere in the neighborhood was changing, and there was starting to be like gangs and stuff was forming. And my brother was kind of really impressed by all of that. And I wasn't. But my mom decided, well, look, you know what? I'm sending you guys to school. You're going to go to Madison and live with my sister and her husband on Truax Field Air Force Base. And that's where I wound up, and that's how I met Johnny. So Johnny was a guitarist, so I would play along with him. He would show me all kinds of things, turnarounds, how to play intro, just, how to play different scales, different things that I would not have learned any other way. And he was so advanced that for me, I was kind of struggling to take it all in, because he was a really advanced musician.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. A lot of people here don't know who he was, but he was trading tips and tricks with Wes Montgomery. They would practice together.
He toured and traveled with a lot of people. He in his early part of his career, he toured with people like Ruth Brown, Nancy Wilson,
Roland Kirk.
Yeah, he played with a bunch of different people, a lot of different jazz artists. But when he was really young, he was playing with a lot of the R&B people of the 50s, like Laverne Baker, all of that. So he had a lot of experience and he also would give me these talks and lectures about don't do this, but do this. And I listened to him because I knew and respected that he really had some real knowledge that I didn't have.
Just a couple more questions about your very early years. I don't know if you ever were associated with this event, but this was a very meaningful event for a lot of young musicians in Indianapolis. Every year, the Indianapolis Recorder would host the Midnight Christmas benefit concerts at the Walker Theater, and that gave a lot of young musicians their first chance to play for a large audience. Did you ever happen to play at any of those concerts?
No, I was aware of them, and some of the people I played, like Kenny Lewis, did, because he was one of the MCs for it. But I tell you why I wasn't really involved with them. The reason I wasn't really involved with a lot of them is because I had a gig and I was playing.
You were getting paid that night.
I was getting paid. A lot of the unemployed musicians would be part of this. But on Fridays and Saturdays, when these would be occurring, typically they would happen on a Saturday night. I had a gig playing somewhere.
One other musician I wanted to ask you about, who's kind of an unsung musician, and you told me you were close friends with him, Charles Moose Amos, who was a real brilliant Indianapolis songwriter, arranger, who never got his due in the city. Tell us about Moose and his significance in Indianapolis.
Moose was my best friend. When I first left home when I was 18, me and Moose had got an apartment together. And I lived with Moose. He was working at Hearst Bean. It's still over there, I guess. He was working at Hearst Bean Company, and he was a tremendous singer and a pianist. And we started out really, even when I was in high school, when I first met him, we were, to this day I need to get those songs out. We would just spend whole days just making up songs. So Moose was one of my earliest lifelong friends for many, many, many years. I'm still in touch with his wife and all of his kids. I used to babysit all of his children, and me and Moose we were like that. When I first left home, that was my, you know, like we got an apartment together. We had a one-bedroom apartment, and when his girlfriend, who became his wife, hey man, my girlfriend's coming over, man, can you take a hike for about an hour? I said, yeah, man, no problem. We were good friends, man. He was one of the most talented, extremely talented guys, and I used to always try to get him to get involved in organized bands, and I never did really figure out why he didn't want to do it. He would show up at some place and sit down at the piano and play and blow everybody away, but he didn't want to become a part of a group. But later he started writing songs, and he wanted to produce, but he was never, other than when he was, at one point he was in a group that was really, really good. I'm trying to think, they were called because Warren Hurley was in the group.
Not the Monteques.
No, not the Monteques.
Precisions?
What were they called? Warren Hurley, oh man, but he was part of a singing group, and they were really, really good. And when the group broke up, he never joined any more groups. I'll think of the group in a minute.
Yeah, but if you do, shout it out. You're famous for your work with Ebony Rhythm Funk Campaign, which started out as Ebony Rhythm Band. Prior to joining Ebony Rhythm, were you in any notable groups you're going to talk about? I know you played with the Moonlighters, and you had the Golden Soul Show Band. What did you do in that period between Harvey Cook and Ebony Rhythm Band that's notable that you'd want to share?
Let's see. Well, I was inducted. I was drafted in the Army in '65. And so while I was in the Army, I formed a group in Fort Eustis, Virginia called the Golden Soul Show Band. And so me and another guy from Louisville, we formed that, and we played on post. And then when I was sent to Germany, and they found out I could play trombone and I could read music, and they put me in the 8th Army Band. And so I played trombone, and then when they found out I could play bass, they would send me to the Officers Club, and I would play bass for free. But as the war intensified, they pulled me out of the Army Band and took me over to the motor pool and showed me an M60 tank and said, "You are now a tank driver." I'd never driven a tank in my life. And they said, "Well, we'll show you, it's easy." So they opened the hatch, I got inside, and he said, "This is the brake, this is the gas," and they had what's called a T-bar. Some tanks had levers, and the T-bar basically, when you shift, it's like a bicycle. You would think it's real complicated, but if you want to go that way, it's like a bike. You turn this way, you want to go that way. So it would stop one track, and the tank would turn and stop the other track, and would turn that way. And you had gas, and that was it, and you had a brake. And then you had 2 gears, high and low. They showed me that, took me out in the field, and I ran over a couple of trees. He told me to keep going. So I became a tank driver. So, I mean, So, but while I was in the Army there, I didn't get to play a whole lot, but I did go. After that, I wasn't able to play at the Officers Club, but I would still. I had my bass. I had a bass there with me, and I would play in the barracks, and I would, play along with records and stuff like that.
What year did you come back to Indianapolis officially?
I remember that well. January 18th, 1968, right as the Tet Offensive, because the Tet Offensive had just started, and they wanted to hold me in Fort Dix, New Jersey, because of the Tet Offensive, and so that was when I got out. And as soon as I got out, I hooked back up with Greg Scott. And that's when we started the Golden Soul Show Band. You've seen the pictures of Walter Webb, me,
Matthew.
Matthew was instrumental in getting me. We played with, there were several other guitar players that came through there, but that was the beginning. And then Matthew was the one that introduced me to Ricky and Booby and started the Ebony Rhythm Band. And I wasn't thrilled about that at all, because I met these guys, they were like, they just got out of high school. And I was like, man, these are some kids, man. What are you talking about? He said, I know, man, but man, they got soul, man. I said, all right. And I discovered about 2 weeks after I joined the band that the guitar player could only play in one key. Booby could only play in one key, A. I said, man, you can only play in one key. Man, and he would start off playing, but if we played another key, he was lost. So Ricky, the band leader, fired him. Said, we got to get another kid. So that was when Roach joined the group. And Roach was with the group for a very brief period of time, only about maybe not even quite 2 months. And then he rehired Booby back. When he came back, he could play in all 12 keys. And he grew from just being a fledgling musician. I'd never seen anybody grow that fast as he did in those couple of months.
And it was in '69 that you formed Ebony Rhythm Band?
69.
Yeah. This group had a very unique sound. You were picking up influences from rock music, funk music. Tell us about the sound of Ebony Rhythm Band.
Well, me, Matt, and one things that kind of like was a glue for us. We did not want to be a show band. There were lots of show bands around here. In fact, all of the predominantly black groups were show bands. And we didn't want to be that. We didn't want to do that. We also did not want to really be, quote unquote, a black music only band, because we had these other influences we had been listening to. We had been listening to Spencer Davis Group, we had been listening to other people. And so we wanted to be more than just another show band. And so that was something, so we immediately started experimenting, trying to develop our own music. And so a lot of the things that the other groups didn't do, we did. We immediately started tinkering with anything, because there weren't a whole lot of effects, but Booby got a wah-wah pedal. We would feed our instruments through anything we could find. We'd run it through a tape deck, and then the tape deck into an amp. The tape deck would distort, and we would go, oh man, listen to that sound. We were experimental, and we would do all kinds of crazy things. We had strobe lights, and people would tell us, turn the strobe light off, you're making me sick. We didn't want to just, we wanted to make some waves. We just didn't want to be a copycat band like most of the bands around here were. They were all copycats. We had no interest in that whatsoever. Yeah. I still don't.
I'm not sure if most folks today know what a show band is. This is a group, they do cover songs, wear matching outfits. What made a
cover
show
band?
Yeah,
cover band. A show band was, you had matching outfits, you had a little stage show you did. Certain people in the group would do crack jokes. Sometimes you would have a little stage show like I remember playing in the Moonlighters. They were a show band, and Little Pete, they had a specific act where they would do this song, and Little Pete and one of the saxophone players would pretend to knock him out, right? And Little Pete would fall on the floor gently, not hurting his trumpet, and then the other horn player would pull out a pair of women's panties and wave them over his face, and he would come to life. I mean, this is some of the kind of stuff they really did. I mean, seriously, man. Then he would spring up and start playing a trumpet solo. Crowd would go crazy. Then women would throw their panties on there. In the audience, in the Blue Eagle. Man, you talking about crazy. Lord have mercy.
Ebony Rhythm Band was one of the first and one of the few psychedelic funk bands in the country at that time. And you mentioned the strobe lights. You had a psychedelic light show that you brought onto Indiana Avenue at the Blue Eagle nightclub. How were audiences in R&B clubs responding to the kind of music you played at that time?
They were puzzled at first, but they liked it. Some of it, the strobe light we bought, and the other lights actually were made by Matthew. Matthew made all. He went and got milk crates, and he put these multicolored lights in there. And then there was a company called Heathkit that made up in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and they had what's called light box. And so he soldered the light box together. It had Variacs inside of it. It was a kit. Then you plugged in lights in there. Then you plugged a microphone into it. And the lows would be blue, whatever, the mids would be green, the highs would be red. And so we would turn that on, and then we would play and some of the blue lights and red lights, and we'd turn on the strobe. At first, they were like, what the heck are you doing? But then they started liking it. And because we were the only band doing it. And at first, Pete, the owner, was like, hey, you guys got to turn that stuff off. We said, man, what do you mean, man? This is what we do. And we would think, wow, this is going to be the only week we're going to play here. The next week, all these people came back and they wanted to see the light show. And we were playing stuff at Three Dog Night, One is Loneliest Number, a whole bunch of other stuff like that. And they would mix in our own original music. That was the other thing. We started mixing in our music with cover songs immediately. We didn't want to play covers. We figured, well, it's okay to play covers, but we didn't want to play covers only. So after a while, people would ask, they didn't know it was our music. They would ask for our music.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mentioned to you I wanted to focus today on your time in Indianapolis leading up to the group's departure to California. I want to focus on that early chapter, and I know we got a short amount of time available, but I want to focus the remainder of our time talking about your association with Lamp Records. You know, probably less than a year after you form Ebony Rhythm Band, you're putting out a single on Lamp Records. You become the house band for the label.
Right.
Tell me how your relationship with Lamp started, and just reflect on your experiences with the label. You played on a top 40 hit record by the Vanguards at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of started with, with Pam. Pam was Herb Miller's secretary. When she was a senior in high school. And so we were aware of the Vanguards, and we went over there, and he had a shop over right next door to Alex, right across the street in that shopping center. And we went over there and talked to Pam about it, told him we wanted to do some recording. We wanted to do some recording and stuff. So Herb came and heard us. He liked what he heard and asked us, did we want to become the house band for his label? We said, sure. And we said, well, how much do we get paid? He says, I think he told us, every song you guys will get $50. We were like, sign us up. It was like a lot of money then, like, wow, $50. Man, we were recording 4 or 5 days a week, and we had our own gigs, so we thought for us it was like heaven. And when in between that time, we could diddly dally around in the studio. He would let, and we could keep those tracks. That's how some of the stuff like the outtakes and stuff happened. We in the Vanguard session, we would start playing stuff, and the engineer would turn the machine on and capture what we did. So Herb was really, really instrumental in getting us everything. He leased us a 1970 Ford van. He had it customized for us. He had a rooftop thing put on so we could put our PA in there. He helped us get some better equipment. He even made speaker cables for us. Herb got us our first tours. We were playing on the East Coast, upstate New York, Boston, mainly upstate New York and the Eastern Seaboard. And we would play that, and we would go to up Michigan, like Kankakee, Muskegon, Grand Rapids, and then we would come home. That was a tour. And Herb booked us all of that, and so Herb was really instrumental in not only getting us to record, but he helped us get all the other things that we didn't have a band vehicle until he bought one for us, or he leased it, and we had full access to it. So Herb really, I thanked him many times. We would not have been able to do what we did later had it not been for his help.
Yeah, Herb Miller was the founder of Lamp Records. He was a firefighter. He also promoted concerts with a social club called the Defiance.
Yeah, oh yeah, he brought in everybody, the Dells, James Brown, everybody. So Herb was a high roller in the city at that time, and so he helped us. He got us a gig with Isaac Hayes in Dayton, Ohio. Man, he helped us get a lot of gigs that helped us get to the next level. Without his help, we couldn't have gotten those quote unquote next level gigs. But when we started playing out the King James Version, which we were doing at the 20 grand, that was a whole other thing too. 20 grand was immensely popular. That was how we got on West Coast, because a club owner heard them, and we were playing behind them, and they wanted us to come to his club on Central Avenue in LA, and we did. And that was how we left Indianapolis. But we went there in the vehicle that L&M Productions Herb had leased. And we went all the way to LA. We played there with the King James Version in this club for about a month, but they were really good, but their show was predictable. So once you saw what they did, it was kind of like you knew what they were going to do next. So the club owner came to us and told us, hey, look, I like everything, but if you guys want to stay, I'm going to let them go, but I want to keep you guys here as a house band. And that was how we wound up in LA. So then after that, we met Kent Brinkley, and we started trying to get a record deal. Kent introduced us to Wayne Henderson of the Crusaders, and it was Wayne that landed us our first deal with MCA Records, MCA Uni.
Yeah, and the rest is history with Ebony Rhythm Funk Campaign. Had an incredible career. One final thing I want to ask you is just tell me about the single you put out on Lamp. Soul Heart Transplant, Drugs Ain't Cool. It's a collector's item. Now sells
I think I've told you that story before, but I'll tell it again. We got that deal. They had this contest, and then I'm trying to think who the mayor was at that time.
It was Richard Lugar.
Right,
yeah.
Right, Dick Lugar. And it was believe it or not, this was so long ago, the city county building was new. And so on the Washington Street side, they had a contest, and they were giving anybody who won the contest to develop an anti-drug song. So we were already recording, so we went in the studio, and Jimmy Williams and Ricky sang the lyrics to Drugs Ain't Cool. And we came up with it in just a few minutes. And we came up with that, and they heard it, they played it on the radio, and we won the contest. $500. We took that $500 and went and bought some weed. You young guys, man, you know, we were like, man, we took that money and bought some marijuana. What do you know?
Our conversation today took us up to the point where Ebony Rhythm Funk Campaign is born out in California. The group's music still remains in demand among funk fans today. In the last couple years, you've had releases in Japan, London, among other things that have happened with your music, samples that have happened, prominent samples. As we end, can you just reflect on the time you've spent playing music, and does it mean anything to you that this music is still in circulation around the world?
It means a lot to me. In a sense, it's kind of like the soundtrack to my life. And so when we made this music, it was very purpose driven. In other words, we wanted to do something that we really felt. And so, and when we got this deal with Uni, with MCA, for the first time we really had to be in a really 24-track studio with these big-time engineer, Rick Bakunin, and Wayne was producing us, and I think, what's his name, our co-producer, Stuart Levine. I think Stuart is still alive. Somebody told me he's still alive.
I think so.
I don't know how, man, that guy, well, I won't talk about it. But anyway, we were, for the first time, we were able to really do something in a major studio. And so when we went in, we just gave it all we had, and we played from our hearts. And none of it was fabricated. It was all music that we had been playing, and so it was, when we did it, it really reflected what was on the inside of us. And to some degree, that hasn't changed. I mean, some of the people like are not along with us, like Matthew was a primary force, so was Master Booby, Robert Townsend. They were huge forces because the songs were developed really pretty much just sitting around in the kitchen. We would rehearse in the kitchen in this house. We had a house in West Hollywood on Sweetser Avenue. Right across the corner from us was Rufus. And we would practice on our patio, and they would practice on the patio, and somebody would call the cops. He says, those guys over there, they weren't making all that noise. And they would point over at us. That's how I met Bobby Watson and all the guys in Rufus. That's how I met them and started hanging out with them, because we lived in the same neighborhood. But anyhow, we would practice. So the songs were just basically born out of just us sitting around in the kitchen or the patio, and we would plug up our instruments into an old PA head we had in one speaker, so we wouldn't make a lot of noise, and Matthew would tap on just anything with his sticks, and we would practice right there in the kitchen, and we would come up with the songs. The sad part about it is some of the best songs that Matthew came up with never got recorded. We said we were going to do them on this next album. And part of the reason they didn't get recorded is because at the time, I think the group, Matthew's ideas were too advanced. And, you know, we wanted something that was more, what he doing was organic, but it was really rhythmically very complex stuff with like multiple time signatures and everything. And we said, man. So it was from the heart, all of it, every bit of it. And it stood the test of time. And I listened back to it. And well, I know a lot more as a musician now than I did then. I'm proud of what I did. And I think the other group members are proud of what they did.
It's an incredible catalog of music you've created. You continue to make incredible music. I can't thank you enough for doing this today. Every time I talk to you, I feel like I learn all this new and vital information about the city and the music culture of Indiana. So thank you so much for taking time to do this.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoy being here, and I hope that whatever I've shared will be an encouragement for some other younger musicians who may be thinking about doing what I've done. I would just say, tell them to get started and stay at it.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.